Okay, so first of all, I just want to say thank you everyone for joining. It's great to see everyone on the screen, and thank you to the organizers for arranging the session. So yeah, my name is Bhuta Bhavana, but people call me BBD for short, just makes it nice and easy, rolls off the tongue. In terms of my own journey, in terms of coming to understand more about spiritual life, deeper wisdom. So there was a few key things that happened. When I was very young, I was reading and studying a lot about many different traditions and cultures. I was just always curious to understand things and have a deeper understanding. So when I was about 13, I started meditating. And I have to admit, it wasn't for a spiritual purpose. I actually read, I read one book, and it was explaining how by engaging in meditation, you can access more of the mind's potential. And you could use that to achieve a number of goals. And I thought, that sounds like me. So let's get into it. So I started meditating when I was 13, went to university, studied at the London School of Economics. So my undergraduate degree was in philosophy and economics. And that was actually a really powerful experience. While I was there, we had a very good teacher. I think his name was Dr. Jack Sherry. He was Italian. And I remember one time he was teaching us social philosophy. And one of the things he talked about was how in the 60s, some of his friends had come, they'd been on some kind of course, some kind of yogic course, and they'd come to his house and they'd actually shown him certain yogic exercises which allowed them to do certain things which really impressed him actually. And so we were speaking about that. But while I was in my second year of university studying philosophy and economics, because of my previous reading, we were looking at Western philosophy and their answer to certain questions like, you know, what is the self, right? So who am I? Is there a supreme being, right? How do we know? How do you determine right action from wrong action? So we were looking at these questions, and I knew that there were Eastern teachings that answered those same questions, right? Because I'd already had some exposure to something in that space. So it got me curious. I wanted to also understand, what do the Eastern teachings have to say about these same questions? And then in addition to that, as I was also meditating and so on, as I started to explore Bhakti Yoga, right, the KC tradition, I started to have certain powerful experiences which helped me to understand two things. Two things really stood out to me. Because I was studying philosophy and economics, we were taught to be very logical, very objective, and very rigorous when we looked at different philosophical teachings and understandings. So the first thing was that I understood that the teachings were very consistent, it made sense, and it was applicable. That was one point. The second was, you know, through engaging in the different types of, you know, Bhakti Yoga practices, I had certain distinct experiences that confirmed the same things that I was reading about. So it was no longer just like an idea or a dogma or someone's belief, but I could see that it was really powerful, experiential. And the third thing, actually, I'll just add, to be honest, it was just incredibly blissful, to be honest with you. It was just like, it brought about such an extreme and deep level of lasting happiness. I was just like, wow, I'm sold. So that's basically my journey in terms of how I came. Yeah, any other questions?
Wow, that was amazing. Yeah, I can definitely relate to a lot of that stuff ever since I joined this process. So the first question from our audience that we have is from Ama Dragomir. So if we can unmute her or him.
Yes, hi, thank you for being here. I was wondering, how can we reconcile the deeply spiritual lifestyle with a very materialistic corporate world without sacrificing the authenticity of our spiritual practices?
Wonderful point. Thank you. First of all, thank you, Emma, for asking the question. I think the question that you've asked, it's a great question. And it's something that many of us wonder about, because this is something that was on my mind a lot. I thought that if I'm going to try and do something spiritual, does that mean I'm going to be unable to interact in the world, right? And what I found over 20 plus years of being on this journey is that actually, and I was discussing this with my wife this morning, actually being spiritual, it increasingly becomes something which is necessary in order to navigate effectively our duties, our responsibilities, and our relationships. So, I mean, there's so many examples. So one of the things that I've been finding incredibly infusing over the last, I don't know, 10, 20 years is how to apply spiritual wisdom in my everyday life, right? So one of the things that actually one of the things I'm going to launch is around relationships, right? So helping people to understand relationships and the dynamics around relationships. And one of the things that I used in my own relationships was trying to understand more about me as a person, trying to understand more about other people in order to have relationships which are more healthy, where we resonated more and where we connected more, you know. And I use that even in the workplace, right? So I try to understand a lot more about the people I'm dealing with, what makes them tick, what motivates them, in order to know how to have a more mutually beneficial relationship with them. And because I've studied this over many, you know, decades, not just in terms of spiritual knowledge, but what's interesting, I've been able to compare it to what's out there in the self-help field. And I'll be honest with you, the knowledge that we've come across in terms of the Bhakti Yoga path is, I couldn't, if I told you it was light years ahead, that would be an understatement. It gives you tremendous ability to understand yourself in a deep way, to understand other people in a deep way, and therefore to understand how to relate. So I would say that it enhances literally every other area of life. The one other thing I would add to that is that when you're happy, that joy spills over. So what I found is that by engaging in my own spiritual journey, it's given me a level of insight and a level of happiness, which allows me to take all the other experiences of life in a healthy and balanced way. So I'm not overly disturbed by things that people do. I can understand where they're coming from. I'll be honest, I was having this conversation with a friend of mine who works in the same field that I work in. And she was disturbed because of certain behaviors that she was seeing. And what was interesting was what I told her is that if you have spiritual insight, you can calibrate your expectations of other people, not just based upon your own desires, but you can know what to expect from other people based upon their character. A lot of people get frustrated in relationships. They get hurt in relationships because they expect things of people that that person can't deliver on, right? And one of the things I was talking to her about was sometimes you're dealing with people who are leaders. Like, let's say they're in a position of leadership, but they've had no training. They don't have the character to lead generally. So in that case, you have to dial down your expectations of them. Otherwise, you're going to be really disturbed, because without training, and they don't have a natural talent for it, they're naturally not going to perform on the level that you're expecting. So it's not that, oh, they're bad people. No, they're just performing according to their current level of competence and character. You see? And of course, if they get more training, that will improve. But you know, if you're frustrated because you have an unreasonable expectation of someone, that's not their fault. That's my responsibility. You know, and I see that a lot. I see so many people, they're frustrated, and it's a frustration that they've created themselves because they don't have that wisdom to calibrate what they should expect from other people. So we'll be sharing some more on that over the coming weeks or months. But yeah, that's a whole other story. So does that answer your question, Amma, first of all?
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you for your question. Hope you're having a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing. Yeah, I think, yeah, definitely, for sure. I find that in all my relationships all the time. Like, I'll have an expectation of someone, and then they don't meet that expectation, and that will always lead to a frustration in my heart. So that was really, really powerful. Thank you so much. The next question that we have is an anonymous question. What is the Bhakti Yoga / Krishna conscious perspective on sex?
That's a good question. Okay, so yes, let's start here. So my mentor, he actually, we had a celebration for his passing away, because he passed away about 15 years ago. he wrote and spoke a lot about this topic because it's a good topic to get into, actually. And if anyone's interested, what I'll do is I'll put in the chat window one of his books, which go into this in a bit more detail. Maybe they can share that if you choose. But just to give you a few key points. So the KC perspective on sex is that sex is it's actually a fundamental principle of life. And I'll explain what I mean by that. In essence, sex is it is one type of pursuit for an eternal goal that every single one of us have. Let me explain. An eternal goal that unites everyone, no matter what race, gender, ethnicity, nationality. In Sanskrit, we call this Anandamaya. Okay, the translation is that every single one of us is pleasure seeking by nature. Okay, so we all want not only pleasure, we want the deepest, most lasting, most fulfilling, most intense pleasure that we can. Okay, and our Bhakti Yoga tradition says that the reason why we want that pleasure, funnily enough, is because that's our original, it's our original birthright. By nature, in our pure state, in our state of full consciousness, full awareness, we experience that pleasure in ever increasing and varied intensity forever. Okay, so it's natural to have that desire for the deepest and most lasting pleasure. That's the first point. The second point is that within our worldly existence, the most intense kind of physical experience one can have, right, in that sense, is that sense of sexual union. Okay, now there is another point here. So on the one hand, we know this eternal principle of pleasure seeking is there for everyone. We also know that within the worldly sense, in the physical sense, there is this intense experience that one has when there is sexual union. And one of the reasons for that is that the union in the sexual sense, it engages all the different senses. That's one of the reasons why it becomes such an intense experience. Now, the key point to bridge the two things is this. There are higher states of pleasure than even the pleasure that comes through physical activity. I know that can be a bit revolutionary for people, but it's a fact. It is a fact that there are, and those states of experience are actually like they're light years even more intense, more pleasurable, more sustained than even the physical union that we call sex in this world, right? Now, let's just kind of go into, because it's a great topic, and I'm glad whoever answered the question, I'm glad you brought it up, because it's something that's on everyone's minds usually, right? Because we're pleasure seeking by nature, even you see the adverts, let's say you see someone of the opposite sex who looks attractive, that those desires can come up. The key thing to point out about modern society, and this is unfortunate, is that with the issue with modern society is that it overstimulates the physical desires, right, of which sex is like primary, and it undermines, represses, or minimizes the spiritual desires. So the whole thing becomes out of balance. There's a place for sexual union, right, within our tradition, and this is also very interesting, that we actually understand that there is a there's a refined understanding of the power of sexuality, the power of the sex desire. I was going to share, I mentor some people, and I've been meaning to send this out to my mentees. And I was going to share, and maybe I'll do it later today if I've got some time. When I was doing some research on this, in the Bhakti Yoga traditional teachings, it explains that one looks to get married around, from the kind of 25-year-old age upwards. And it explains that before that, when a man is able to practice celibacy, right? But when I say celibacy, I'm not talking about the kind of funny stuff that goes on where people repress their desires. I'm not talking about that, because that doesn't work. Maybe it's such a big science, but I'm just going to throw a few things out because I know you're intelligent people, and it's good for you to hear this when you're young, because it can make a real difference. There's a whole science to this. When someone is young, if they're able to retain their sexual energy, what it does to their physical body and their mind is their physical body and their mind develops it develops optimally. When people engage in sexual activity before the body and mind is mature, it actually removes some of the fuel for the mental and physical development of the individual, right? And this is actually explained. There's a whole science to this. And therefore, when they reach the point where they're going to get married and so on, you know, at a certain later stage, because from 25, the full development has taken place on the physical body. But when some of these sexual energies have been released, like people have engaged in promiscuity, etc., their body and mind doesn't develop to the fullest extent, which then can also have repercussions as they go on with the rest of their life. So that's one thing. Now the question therefore is, what the hell do we do with the desires? Okay, that should be an intelligent question. As we said, the way, and this is also something that comes up in a narrative in the Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the most ancient texts of Bhakti Yoga. And so in the conversation between Krishna and Arjuna, Krishna talks, and the Sanskrit, I'll just say it, is param drisva nivartate, that one is able to let go of a lower impression by engaging in a higher taste, right? So we're pleasure seeking by nature. And this is actually also the underlying law of how to transform bad habits into good habits. Every bad habit, or every habit, let's say, it's fulfilling some purpose, whether it's smoking, whether it's sex, etc. So what I've often trained people to do when we've talked about this is to understand what's behind the habit, what's behind the desire. So let's look at sex. So when we talk about sex, for many people, we say, okay, what does sex mean to you, right? So one is we talk about the ultimate principle of people seeking pleasure, but it's even more than that. For many people, what is sex? Sex is intimacy, right? I want to feel I'm close to someone, right? For many people, sex is affection. I want to feel that I'm valued and I'm appreciated, right? I'm recognized. For many people, sex could be, unfortunately, because this is also happens, for some people, sex can just be excitement or manipulation. I want to feel that I can attract this person and I can charm them and I can get what I want from them, you see? So as young people, you are at a stage in your life where if you understand some of these deeper things when you're young, believe me, I mean, your life, it will be, you'll have so much happiness, you won't even know what to do with it. So the KC perspective on sex is it has a place, but what we recommend is that sex, the healthy expression of sex is within a committed relationship, ideally a married relationship, and the highest expression within that context is where, when both partners are healthy, they're engaging in that union in order to attract a soul who takes birth in that family, so procreation, and that soul is of a higher consciousness who can set a wonderful example and do more for humanity. Now, this is beyond the scope of this particular section, but I love speaking to students because I know you're in a stage in your life where you're questioning, you're trying to understand more about life, and I'll put the book if you want to know more about this, but there's some very esoteric things about sexual union, really esoteric. I'll just share one, but there's many. One of them is that when, for example, a man and woman come together in sexual union, their mentality at that point of procreation has a key influence on attracting a particular type of person to enter into the womb of that woman who will take birth. And there's a science of it. And this was understood in the ancient Vedic knowledge, that if one understood that science, you could consciously call into your own married life a person who has a certain type of characteristic, a certain quality of consciousness, and who has a certain kind of inner harmony, so that the whole process of parenting can immediately shift just because the husband and wife have made the conscious sexual union in a very, very deliberate and intentful way, still with great affection, still with great love and union for each other. And in doing that, they're able to attract a person to take birth into their family who's of a very, very high caliber and high character. And then that person is a joy to parent, right? And also that person will also resonate with both parents because they'll have certain distinct aspects of both the mother and father's mentality in common. And then it creates more harmony in the family and also more union in the family life. And those people tend to be great high achievers in life. One of the things that happen when people do this, they're in a committed relationship and they bring a child in that way, is that those children tend to be higher performers in life. One of the things that happen when the parents engage in union consciously for a child is that the child will have one mentality. There's many people right now in the world who are trying to understand their purpose and they're confused. And one of the secret or esoteric reasons why many young people today are confused about their purpose is because their mentality is mixed. And the reason their mentality is mixed is because at the time of procreation, the parents were on very different pages. They were not in sync with each other. And what happens, therefore, is the conscious and the unconscious mind has a certain level of incoherence, which makes it harder to kind of figure out who I am and what I'm meant to be doing in life. Of course, anything can be reconciled when one engages in the spiritual practices and the spiritual path. But that's one of the esoteric reasons behind these things. So if you're interested in that, I'll just put like a book reference, but it's a great science. And I'm really glad for that question. So those are a few aspects. That's a whole seminar in itself, but those are a few ideas around the KC perspective on sexuality. I hope that answers the question of whoever asked.
Wow, that was mind-blowing, literally mind-blowing. I'm blown away by all of that knowledge. That was so helpful. Thank you so much. I'm actually going to read that book that you're going to suggest. Just before we ask the next question, I asked you guys, can you guys turn on your video? I think it'll be really helpful. And obviously, Bhuta Bhavana will be able to see your guys' reaction to everything that he's speaking about. So it will obviously help him as a speaker. So if you guys could just turn on your video, that'd be really, really great. The next question, oh, actually, just quickly, I wanted to make a point. What you were speaking about this, what can come from being celibate, you know, it actually makes sense from just the biological perspective as well. Like, and that's what kind of made me believe it in the first place, just because I come from a very scientific background.
Can I just add to that also, just on your point? So if one is able to, and again, because it's not about repressing it, it's about channeling that energy in a healthy way. So if people want to develop that, my mentor was an advisor to like famous heads of state, etc. And he was very close to Muhammad Ali. He's kind of well known as one of the famous figures in boxing in the past. And Muhammad Ali would also point out that before a major boxing match, he would practice celibacy. And he knew that it allowed him to keep a certain level of sharpness, mental dexterity, etc., which allowed him to be more effective and more on point. And anyway, in the book that I mentioned, I think it's mentioned in there as well. So when one practices channeling that energy, that means you should ask yourself, how much physical activity do I need to use to release that energy? Because there's a higher expression. So it could be sports, running. How much social engagement do I need to use in order to channel that energy? So it could be finding very deep, intimate friendships where you channel that energy, you're able to reveal your mind and heart, etc. How much mental engagement do I need? So stimulating your mind, intellectual activity, learning and reading, but then also along with that, it can be especially directed and controlled through both spiritual knowledge, like bhakti yoga knowledge, and through spiritual practices such as mantra meditation, because they can help you to access a higher level of pleasure, which means that you're not immediately pulled by the senses or just forced to engage in that just because you just need some stimulation. The one last thing I'll also say on that is the sex energy being very powerful. If it's not dealt with properly, it can cause one to end up in relationships where one feels mistreated, devalued, or even degraded. I remember when I was at university, I remember there was one guy that I heard about, and what he would do, he would just basically play women, right? He'd pretend to be interested in them, have sex with them, and then and once he'd had sex with them, just kind of discard them. And I saw, and it was interesting because the Vedas also talk about it actually had it had sometimes traumatic effects on those women, right? Because it left an impression that they're not valuable and they're not valued. And what they found was those same women in future relationships, they had difficulties trusting men because of how they'd been mistreated by men previously, you know? And I'm sure many of you know people who've been in that experience, men or women. So it's very, very important to understand that when you're young, if you can use this period to really deeply value yourself, understand your purpose, understand the purpose of life, it sets you up for a success that you'll skyrocket. It'll be crazy. So just a few points on that. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the host.
No, I mean, you again, mind blowing again. And what you said about how this, when a guy would like play a load of girls, obviously the opposite happens as well. You know, it affects his consciousness as well, and it affects his relationships in the future as well. So that's definitely true.
One of the things that happens, see, we all believe, I think everyone knows now, in modern society, we talk about karma. What goes around comes around. So if I, as a guy, if I take advantage of women, there's two things that can happen. One is in the process of Bhakti Yoga, we talk about how there's reincarnation. So whether you believe in that or not, there's some interesting research by Dr. Ian Stevenson on that. But there's another side. If I'm the man who takes advantage of women, then one of the things that can happen to me when I'm older is I then have to be the father of the daughter who's coming home crying and broken because men have treated her in the same way that I treated women when I was younger. You see? Because what goes around comes around. Karma is an exercise in empathy. So it's like, okay, you don't mind treating women badly, fine, but you don't see how much they suffer. Okay, you'll see how much they suffer, and we're going to make it up close and personal because you'll see your daughter being treated like that, and it'll really teach, it'll bring the message up close and personal that if you don't want, you know, so, you know, you get the point. So so even as a young man now, part of it is that we can do things that are going to determine our experiences in the future. The way to design the future is to always do the right thing in the present.
For sure, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
100%. Yeah, I think it's all about having that wider perspective that, you know, this could definitely come back around in a way I won't even expect it. The point I was mentioning earlier was just about the fact that how by practicing celibacy, you know, you can figure out so much about your life and, you know, become more determined. And from a biological perspective, you know, think about hunter-gatherers kind of situation. By retaining their sexual energy and remaining celibate, they would subconsciously tell their mind that I'm seeking a mate, and therefore I need to use all of my energy, meaning more confidence, meaning more strength, meaning higher ability, heightened abilities in every single way. And that can be applied into modern day by heightened abilities in terms of making better decisions about my life, heightened abilities in terms of getting better relationships, etc. So definitely makes so much sense. So thank you so much. The next question we have is from Molly. So if we can unmute Molly, please.
Hey, Molly.
Hi. Yeah, thank you for your insight. It's really interesting.
Thank you for joining me.
Yeah. So basically, obviously, there's been a lot of change in your life, especially with moving into the corporate world. And I think we can all agree there's obviously a lot of change around us at the moment. So what advice would you give to someone dealing with a big change without losing touch with your spirituality?
Very good point. That's a really good question, and thank you for this. I always love hearing these questions because it helps me to reflect a bit more deeply for myself. There's a few things. You see, it's easier to navigate change when you're situated on something which is more stable. You see? So what you'll see if you do a careful study of people who are able to use changes in life and they're able to turn changes into opportunities, you'll see that they have certain foundations, certain stable foundations, which allow them to manage any external change in a way that's optimal. So, first thing, if there's stable relationships, right? That means you've built real relationships where you're with people who actually want the best for you, right? You know, and they've shown over time that they want the best for you in their day-to-day interactions with you. If you build that type of network, then that network will give you a certain level of stability. And I call this the intelligence network. If you have a network of people like that, then whenever you're dealing with change, you're not just using your own intelligence to figure out how to navigate it, but you already have a network of other people who care about you, and you can get their collective insights into how to navigate that change optimally. That's the first thing. The second thing is anticipation. So oftentimes you'll see that people who live life more consciously, and mantra meditation helps you to do this. When people live life more consciously, then rather than being a victim of change, they initiate change, you see? So you can, rather than being the reactive recipient of things that happen in your life, you can consciously take life by the reins and say, let me make positive improvements in my life. Positive improvements are a change, you see? So what I would encourage everyone to do, especially as a young person, is look for opportunities to take positive steps forward in different areas of your life. So you be the change, you make the change proactively, and what happens when people are really disturbed by change? You often see it's the people who do not proactively move forward in developing higher states of awareness, higher states of consciousness. They just stay as they are, and then they get hit by some surprise that knocks them off course. So I would say that the best way to manage change effectively is to be the manager of the change. That means simply look to see, where can I improve? And always be in that mindset of looking at how you can improve yourself. The most important improvement isn't just the dress or what you wear. There are two things: who you associate with and your internal association being your mind. If you can change your thought patterns, and that can come through, again, reading books of spiritual wisdom and through spiritual meditative practices, you actually change your internal dialogue. So you change your relationship with yourself, and make sure that you try to spend time with people who are on a progressive journey, ideally a journey where they're trying to develop higher levels of consciousness, higher levels of understanding about life. And when you do those two things, it creates a foundation whereby you have the intelligence to manage change properly. You have the emotional support of people to help you, to support you even when you go through, let's say, emotional changes. And you have the stability of consciousness whereby you're proactively driving positive outcomes rather than being a victim of whatever life is throwing at you. Does that make some sense, Molly? I think you're on mute. Okay, that's fine. Thank you. Thanks for the thumbs up. Okay.
Wow, that was amazing. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the answer. So the next person we have is Dishna. So if Dishna could unmute.
Hey, Dishna.
Hi, I was blown away by so much knowledge. How do you stay focused and motivated for a long time?
That's a great question. So one of my mentees asked me this last year, and I've been meditating on this a lot. There's a very, again, we'll put some stuff out on this in the future. Well, I'm going to ask you, Dishna, actually, do you want, what level of answer do you want? Do you want like a kind of root answer, or do you want like a more superficial technique? You let me know, because there's different ways of answering
it. Root.
Okay. Now this is right. So if you really want to focus, the most important fundamental, like wisdom level solution for focus is to understand who you are. Okay, and I'll explain how this works. If you figure out who you actually are, right? What kind of person you are, what inspires you, what you're meant to be doing. If you get that one thing, then the rest of your life becomes automatically more focused. If I understand who I am, and I understand what I'm meant to be doing, then I can turn down the noise. When you see people who are too distracted, it's a sign that there's a lack of clear identity. You see, there's actually a study on this. When people are too distracted, there's a lack of clear identity. So what happens when there's a lack of clear identity is you're confused about what you're meant to be doing. So you can be pulled in a million different directions by a million different people telling you, oh, why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? But the more that you know who you are, the more you're able to figure out what are your talents, what are your energizers, right? Which people bring out the best in you, right? So and again, to the point that Molly made, I'll tell you who's really good at this. My wife's a pro at this, right? Because I actually picked up a lot from her. If you figure out who you are, then you can proactively build into your life the things which actually work for you. You see, the people who haven't figured out who they are, and there is a space for experimentation while you're figuring it out, but try and figure it out quick. The quicker you do that, the faster the more you get ahead of everyone else. So people who haven't figured out who they are, they get distracted by everything because they don't know what to do. And they don't know what to do because that lack of clarity about what to do is actually, it's the root of it is a lack of clarity about who they are as a person. My own mentor, I mean, he had a very strong identity. So he was just ahead of the crowd because he knew who he was. And because he knew who he was able to figure out what he's meant to be doing. I have a phrase, no ID, no impact. Okay, no ID, no impact. And what I mean by that is that if you're not clear on who you are, even if you do things externally that seem good, you won't be fulfilled, right? So one of the things that they teach in the field of training and development, and some of you will have heard of it, is Gallup's Strengths Finders. And so you can look this up online, and it's a psychometric, and what you do is you answer the psychometric. It tells you about yourself, about your particular skills and talents. And more broadly, and again, we'll talk about this, maybe in a future KC or whatever. If you know what your talents are and you play to your strengths, then a lot happens for you. You're more motivated. When you're more motivated, going back to Molly's point, when you hit challenges, but you hit challenges from your, let's say motivation is like a car. An unmotivated person, the car is stationary. Someone who's more motivated, the car's driving really fast, right? So when your car's driving at 100 miles an hour, you're highly motivated. Then when you hit a challenge, you just break through it. Now compare that to someone who's unmotivated. When they hit that challenge, the challenge just takes them out. So your experience of life is defined by the energy, the motivation, the purpose that you have, the strength of purpose. And the strength of purpose is actually based upon how much you understand what you're meant to be doing. There's two levels. The first level is a spiritual level, right? So doing something for your consciousness. If you have that in place, you're automatically in a powerful space to deal with everything because you're consciously developing a higher perception and a higher insight on life. That's the first level. The second level is understanding yourself as a person in terms of talents and capabilities. You see, I went to a presentation. I think I was studying at the time or just after I graduated from university. Actually, it was while I think I was doing my master's. And I'll be honest with you, I'll be honest, the dude who was giving the presentation, he seemed a bit too slick, right? You know, when you see people and they're kind of just a little bit, maybe a little bit slimy, a little bit too slick, it's a little bit too, anyway. But aside from that, he said something and it was so true. And he was talking about how when you see people who are ahead of the curve in their careers and their occupation, he said one of the things that you'll see is that they figured out what they're meant to be doing. They play to their strengths. So if you figure out what your talents are, and then you find something that aligns with your talents and your temperament. No one talks about this, but it's not just your talents, it's your temperament. If you're an introvert and you do a job which forces you to have to speak to people all the time, you might feel drained, right? Because you just feel like, I just need some time alone. When the whole coronavirus thing hit, it was interesting because there were many people who were introverts. They didn't say anything, but they loved the fact that they were on lockdown. It was like, oh, finally, I can spend time by myself. They absolutely loved it. And there were other people, they were extroverts, and they were living in their, by themselves in their own flat, and they're just dying. It's like, I need to speak to someone. It's just going crazy because they get their energy from being around other people. So it's really important to find something that fits your talents and your temperament, 2T, talents and temperaments, right? And when you understand, so, and going back to who you are, when you understand that, then you'll be focused, because you'll naturally be doing things which align with the things that motivate you, the things that energize you, the things that you're good at, and it also makes you more productive as well. Does that give you some things to think about, Nishta? Is that okay?
Yeah, thanks a lot. It really has helped.
No, thank you. It was a great question. I was meant to give a presentation. Maybe we'll do it at some point next year. So there's a restaurant that some of our friends started called Omnon. And they were asking me to give a presentation. I was going to do something on this topic amongst others. So maybe in the future, because that's just a few things to think about. There's a lot more to it. But those are fundamental. Yeah.
Wow, that was amazing. Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, basically when I at the beginning of today, I mentioned how I listened to one talk and it basically changed my career. It was actually Bhuta Bhavana's talk about 6 or 7 years ago in Spain. I literally heard a similar talk on this from him, and I can say hands down, it definitely is true. I went from wanting to be a doctor, where I felt really unmotivated, and I studied again. I kind of went through a whole switch my career, and I didn't listen to what he had to say, and I chose chemical engineering just because the path and the expectation. And again, it felt completely everything. And then as soon as I cut out that noise, immediately my focus came to attention. I was able to not care about anyone's opinions, anything. And I just basically went with what I wanted to do. And immediately I was more productive. Immediately I was more uplifted by what I was doing. So definitely holds value. So thank you so much for that answer.
I'll add one thing on that, because you brought up a really key point. The one thing that I've seen as an issue also, if we don't value ourselves enough, then we'll end up doing things just because it will be recognized by other people, even though we hate it.
Yeah.
And what happens as a result is that you start to resent the people who pressured you into doing something that's not really so aligned with your character, but you're doing it in order to be validated by them, and then you actually feel resentful. So I really want to encourage you, no job is better than another. In fact, a lot of jobs, they have some good elements and some bad elements. So try to find something that fits your talents and your temperament. There's loads of online psychometrics and different things that you can look at to find out. You can also speak to people who know you and say to them, when do you see me at my best? What do you think I'm good at? What do you think I'm bad at? And also introspect yourself. And if you do these things over time, it becomes very clear when you're playing to your strengths. And it's better to do something that you love, right? Something that you enjoy. And the other thing, I'm not here to flatter you. I'll be very honest. No job is perfect. So don't let anyone fool you into thinking that, they got this job and it's just all wonderful. And, I feel the ecstasy from the moment I wake up. No job is perfect, because even if you're playing to your strengths, you may hate your boss, right? Or there may be another person in the team who's just, I can't stand that person, or there's office politics. So I don't want to set you up for failure. It goes back to what I said earlier about setting expectations properly, but you can do the best you can. You can optimize given the other parameters. That's what you're trying to do. Yeah. And then some of you may be able to start your own business where you can create even more of an environment which works for you. And if you're going to do that, learn it from someone else first before you jump into your own business. That's a little bit of advice in that area. But yeah, anyway, we'll talk about that maybe some other time.
Yeah, I think what you raised is such a good point, and it actually reminded me of one of these other points that the other thing is smart trial and error. Like for example, there was I was taught this one time when I left university and I wanted to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. One of the things I was taught was smart trial and error. So I went into a startup company and I basically just tried a bunch of things that I thought I'd like, which was marketing and sales. And then I thought, okay, great, I'm great at sales. Let me try going into an actual sales role. And in that smart trial and error, I discovered that actually sales isn't for me. And then I moved back into marketing, but it was that kind of trial and error that I needed to know exactly where I fit in and why I fit in that way. So yeah, definitely makes sense what you were saying. That actually leads us on to the next question from Maria, who's asked, how do you figure out who you are and what are the practices?
Yeah, so we gave a few of those points. So the trick here is to make sure you try to be as honest with yourself as possible. And if you're going to ask other people, you have to put them in a space where they're going to tell you the truth. Otherwise, what happens is they may feel inclined to tell you something that they think you want to hear, rather than really helping you to understand what works for you. Okay, now, so again, just to echo some of the points. So your own introspection, you can keep a journal. You can notice, when are you at your best? When do you feel really energized? When do you feel really alive? And also notice the opposite. Right? When do you feel really like, I hate this, right? And then when you feel that, check one thing. When you're in that space where you feel really negative, is it what I'm doing, or is it the circumstances in which I'm doing it, right? Because sometimes you may feel down, but it's not because what you're doing is making you feel down. It's that you're tired, you had a difficult time with your friends, or your health is bad, so you have to kind of separate what's causing it. When I feel down, is it what I'm doing, or is it the circumstances surrounding it? So let's just make it very clear. Self-introspection. As part of that, there's loads of psychometrics you can look up online. Very simple. Second, feedback from people who know you and will tell you the truth, and ideally, if they've got a bit of insight. So friends, family, when have you seen me at my best? What do you think my talents are, right? And do that over time. And then you can add maybe what Akash said about the smart trial and error. Because to the point about smart trial and error, you want to have brought this whole thing down to a certain arena, and then you trial and error within that small field. Because there's so many different jobs. You can't do smart trial and error with every single job. You haven't got time. So the whole idea of you trying to narrow things down so you can start to do some focused trial and error within a certain field, within a certain space, or certain different options. The other thing is, when you're going into the workplace, network ahead of time. Speak to your friends and family, and speak to people in the areas that you're thinking could be interesting, and say, look, I'd love to have a coffee with you, just to find out more about what you do. And let them speak to you about it. And people will sometimes overplay their job, and sometimes they'll underplay their job. So the way to get around that is you first ask them, what do you like about your job? What's good about it? And make sure they talk about that. Then you say, what are the things about the job that you think that you don't like? So always explore both polarities, because it gives you more of a balanced view about making a decision. Yeah, the one other thing I'd also say is it's also a lot to do with the company culture. So if you have a good job in a bad culture, you'll be unhappy. You see? So also, to the extent that the people you're around is going to have an effect upon your happiness, try to understand the company culture as well, that you're looking to work in as well. That will also be important for you. Yeah.
Wow, amazing. So thank you so much. So the next question is Kushbu. So if we can unmute.
Hi.
Hi, Kushbu.
Hi. Actually, my question is kind of like in continuation to what you just said, because you were talking about work culture and work environment.
You're on mute, Kushbu. We can't hear you.
Can you? Are you able to hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay. So
You've gone on mute again.
okay. Is it? Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Sorry. Okay. So basically, it's about like if you are practicing spirituality and you are in an environment that is toxic or highly political,
Mm-hmm.
how do you conduct yourself in that environment? Because I mean, supposing if you are not able to avoid that environment, like it could be home, or it could be your job environment. So how do you navigate? I mean, because I know that you can get association, like I understand the importance of having the association of like-minded people, and people who are also spiritually inclined. But it's not something that you're able to always, you know, you might be in an environment where you're criticized a lot, or you know, where you're influenced a lot. And in that case also they might, I mean, mm, they might not be, um, they might be supportive, but and at the same time they might be very critical, uh, or they may not be support. I mean, you can't, I mean, it's something that in which where your environment kind of causes a lot of confusion in your head about what you're doing is, even though if it's something that you're kind of inclined to do, but it's like you're, because you, because the people around you, they don't understand it, and they would, or their understanding would be different from yours. You might end up getting confused because you're doing something and you're getting a benefit out of it and you're getting the experience, but people around you are either envious of you, or they might think you're stupid because you're doing something that they've never thought of doing.
You go on mute again. You're still on mute, Khushbu. Maybe I can start by sharing something, because I think you've given a few key points about your question, and there's a fundamental principle here. The way that you do not get pulled down by negative association is to consciously reinforce yourself whenever you have the opportunity with positive association. Okay, so what happens is, the more that you're taking those opportunities to consciously be around people who raise you up, and the secret of good association, there's let's see, I would call it, let's call it DES, D-E-S. There's three things. One is people who help you to develop. Number two, people who encourage you. And ideally, number three, people who are on the spiritual path. So D for development, E for encouragement, S for spiritual. And irrespective of the environment for work, because in your free time, you have the opportunity to reach out for such people. If you build that kind of association in the times that you can control, it will offset the influences that you can't control. Okay. The one other thing I'll say is, when you're in the work environment, look for allies. The way that you can determine if someone is an ally, you look to see someone who has similar higher values to you. You see, that's how you find an ally. Someone who has similar higher values to you and who respects you, who respect your identity. Those people that are the people you try and gravitate towards and spend more time with. And in that way, you'll be as strong as you need to be, and it will, and especially your association outside of those environments will give you enough strength to resist being brought down when you're in these situations that you can't control. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does, to a very large extent. Thank you so much.
Okay, amazing. So thank you for that answer. I'm just moving on to the next question. I think my internet just went. Can we unmute the next person, please? I just can't see it right now.
I believe the next question was anonymous. I can ask it. So you spoke about this idea of sexual union and the purpose of bringing of elevated consciousness into this world. What about union of people of the same sex, and how do we kind of reconcile that with the teachings of Bhakti Yoga and Krishna consciousness?
You guys have some good questions. so again, actually, the book that I mentioned, that I think Akash has already shared, it goes into a discussion on this as well. And it's a very, very interesting discussion. So the idea here is that naturally, again, we're all pleasure seeking by nature. So no one should be condemned or put down for any orientation, because behind it all, we're all united by that desire for pleasure. Now, in terms of how it plays out, in the Bhakti Yoga tradition, one of the things it points out is that with sexuality, in the ultimate sense, it's not, and I mentioned this before, it's not the ultimate expression of pleasure. So in a sense, it doesn't matter whether people have an orientation towards the opposite sex or the same sex. Above our sexual orientation is our spiritual orientation. Okay, I'll repeat that. Above our sexual orientation is our spiritual orientation. Every single person in the world should be respected because we're all, in our ultimate pristine sense, we're all spiritual beings and we all have this pleasure-seeking desire, okay? And so the best way to experience, as we said before, is to really engage that desire in a higher way, you know? And that should be, and that's really the, I think that's the ultimate conclusion of these points. So everyone should be respected. It's not that, oh, this person's got this sexual orientation or that sexual orientation. No, every person should be respected as an individual, because what we do to other people is also what we are preparing to have experienced ourselves. I hope that's very, very clear. So there should be no mistreatment of people. I mean, right now, there's a whole thing about, obviously, the race riots and what happened in terms of the mistreatment of one person who died. Every single person should be treated with respect and compassion. And we should actually see that the way I'm dealing with anyone, whatever their orientation, whatever their racial background, whatever their gender, whatever their nationality, is how I am being prepared to be treated myself. I hope that kind of, does that answer? Okay, yeah. So everyone is part of our family. We're all part of the same divine family. And that's really important to understand. Okay, yeah.
Wow, amazing. That completely shifts your mindset as a person, just when you view people like that. So the next person we have is Isabel.
Hiya.
Hi, Isabel.
Hi. So firstly, thank you so much for everything that you're saying. Honestly, like, it resonates so much. So yeah, thank you. I was wondering, going back to what you were saying about kind of being motivated by choosing your own path and not really worrying about what other people's path is. How do you reconcile that with like the ego? So I'm pretty sure that my path is being an academic, but I think that it can be very easy to see people like, you know, on Instagram, like influencers or like actors or famous people or whatever. And it's very easy, I think, to be like, oh, well, if I'm an academic, I'm just going to be sitting, I do philosophy as well, sitting, thinking thoughts and writing some books and no one's going to know about me, which obviously doesn't matter. But it's also like, yeah, how do you keep on that rather than, you know, wanting like a glamorous life, if that makes sense?
Okay, so I'll be honest, my first answer that I was going to give you is just become a famous and glamorous academic. but I thought, but that was, we can give a bit more than that. Okay, so that's a very good question, Isabel. And this is something that I've also thought a lot about and kind of wrestled with. I discovered something in my life. Something, I couldn't tell you exactly the year that it became apparent to me, but it started to, and I'll be honest, I think it was a result of my kind of reading spiritual books. What was amazing, what life showed me, and I often tell people about this, and it's just such an incredible experience. I can't think of a better way to put this than seeing beneath the veil. What life started to show me was that there were many people who had so much external prestige, right? I know many people like that. I mean, they would have big houses, you know, 2.4 kids, you know, you see them on Instagram and everyone's smiling and this and that. And what was amazing, I kid you not, I promise you, what life started to show me, what I think the Supreme started to show me, and this happened again and again, it started to come, it just started to give me this peep beneath the curtain. And what I started to see was, wow, I mean, and I'll be honest, what I started to see, it scared me. It shook me. I was on a phone call with a friend of mine, because we're doing some studying together. And we were talking about this, I think 1 or 2 days ago. And we were speaking, and it's an interesting science. In the Vedas, they talk about different categories. And there's one category, just without going into all the technicalities, it's called the mode of passion. You don't need to understand what the term means, but it's characterized by an appearance on one level, and then when you go beneath the surface, something else is going on. And so what I started to see is that in many places, you've got people, they've got all this kind of prestige, recognition, but what shook me, I'll be honest, Isabel, was just how unhappy people were. And I realized, and this is something I've struggled with, and I've always tried to navigate in the right direction, but it's always can be challenging. Well, I realized it's better to go for fulfillment than to go for external prestige. Because you see, there's two types of prestige. There's incidental prestige and there's attached prestige. So incidental prestige is you're doing what you're meant to be doing. You know it's the right thing to do. It fits your talents, it fits your interests, and by chance people appreciate it. Incidental prestige, right? Now that also, that's usually found in people who have a bit more self-esteem, right? So they're not so desperate to be validated by other people that they have to do what other people want, even when it disaligns with what they actually are good at. So that's incidental prestige. Now, attached prestige is when I'm doing something because I'm desperate to be validated by other people. And therefore, even though I'm good at this thing, I instead have to do something else because I want everyone to recognize me. And then what happens when you go for the attached prestige is that even though you're being recognized by other people, you hate yourself and you're resentful because A, you know it's not what you want to do. B, you know that the people who are recognizing you, they're fickle. And the moment you stop doing what they want you to do, they're gonna be like, So it's always, so what happens in the mind is you always feel this sense of instability. You're unstable because it's kind of like, yeah, will they still like me? Will they still give me a round of applause if I don't do what they want? And what I've seen is it poisons relationships because you start to feel resentful towards those people because they don't accept you for who you are. They accept you only when you act in the way that they want you to be. Now, I'm going to put one caveat because again, I don't want to say superficial things. I always like to give you a deeper understanding. There is a place for people pulling us under pressure to act in a way that pleases them. But that only works when that person has A, your best interests at heart, and B, they're mature enough to know what's good for you. So like a good parent puts you under pressure. You're gonna damn well get your homework done, right? Right? You're gonna actually get a job. You're not gonna laze around at home all the time, right? But that pressure is a pressure on you to do something that's actually for your well-being. So they're pulling pressure on you to do something that's ultimately in your best interests. The unhealthy form is where they're putting pressure on you because they're selfish to do something that's not in your own best interests, but is just to fulfill their own superficial wants and desires. Make sense? Yeah. So when the two things are out of alignment, that's where things start to go really badly wrong. And that's a hidden poison in relationships. I gave a talk recently, and it's incredible. Not the talk, but the research that I read about this. And you can look him up. His name's Gottman, Gottman. He's able to predict with 94% accuracy if people's relationships, I think marriage relationships, are going to break up. And one of the things he looks for is whether there's resentment boiling in the relationship. So resentment comes up when people feel they can't say what they really think and feel because they'll be shut down. And then it boils up. They can't say anything because if I say what I really think, then I'll get shut down. So then what happens is after all, they just get sick of being in that association, they go off. So if you know the science, we call it the mode of ignorance. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna talks about different categories. And what happens is when people do things in the mode of ignorance, which is when we shut people down unfairly, when we don't listen to them, what happens is the mode of ignorance increases, and the mode of ignorance in the Bhagavad Gita, it leads to destruction. right? And so when people bring up the mode of ignorance between them and other people, you can guarantee that if it stays like that, over time, the relationships will be destroyed. Does that answer give you some things to think about, Isabel?
Yes. Okay, cool. Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, that I really need to hear that, to be honest with you. So thank you. Yeah, that's yeah. Thank you so much. I really did need to hear that.
And I'll just share with you one other point. The reason, it's not that the goal of life is to have the right career. That's not the goal of life. But the reason why we want you to do something that's actually in line with your nature is because if you do a job, and again, no job's gonna be perfect, so I don't want to set you up for failure. But if you do something that more aligns with your temperament and your talents, what happens is your mind is more peaceful. When your mind is more peaceful, it's easier to be in your relationships with other people. A large part of your happiness is going to come from your relationships. Your job is one factor, but that's the economics of life. But a large degree of your happiness is going to come from your relationships and, of course, spiritual practice as well. So the reason why the Bhakti Yoga tradition talks about this is because if you're doing something that fits your talents and temperament, you're not so mentally burned out when you leave the workplace. You've got a bit more mental energy, so you can have a better quality of relationships, and your mind is more peaceful, so it's easier to focus your mind on your spiritual practices, on your spiritual reading, on your spiritual association, and that allows you to make faster progress on your spiritual journey as well. That's why it's important. It's not important just for itself, but it helps move in that direction as well.
Yeah. Do you think there's something to be said that, like, if you believe that what you're doing is worthwhile, then that kind of takes away the need for attached, what do you call it, like attached prestige? Because I think for me, I can be like, oh well, I need to be well known, I need to, you know, like kind of have that like recognition, because otherwise, like, what's the point in doing anything, because it's not going to be known about, and it's just like that kind of abyss of like then, like, you know, did I really count for anything? So maybe a way to counteract that, with going along with like what you're saying, is that, yeah, if you genuinely believe that that's what you're meant to be doing, and that's the way that you're best going to give to the world, maybe not all the ways that everybody best gives the world are ways that make you like prestigious. Absolutely. Sometimes they're just as simple as like being there for somebody, or, you know, writing a paper that helped one person or like a group of people. It doesn't have to be like, you know, not everyone is Benedict Cumberbatch. You know,
I love what you're saying. I'm going to be very honest. I know people who are very insecure, and sometimes what happens is, due to being insecure, they're desperate for that attached recognition. I also know people, my mentor, I mean, even as I think about it, he had an incredibly strong character, incredibly secure, and therefore he was able to do great things, but he wasn't dependent. He wasn't doing great things so people would look at him and tell him how wonderful he was. He could do it from a place of deep integrity and contribution. He cared about, and I always try and follow in that suit. I want to be a person who cares about other people. And what I've seen happen also, and this is a bit esoteric, when I act from a place of genuine concern for others, then whether one person or 1 million people see what I've done, I get some inner reciprocation, which is deeply lasting and deeply fulfilling. If I act from a place of just trying to get attention, then even if 1 million people like it, I still feel empty. So what actually happens is I've cheated myself. You see the point? That's the first thing. But there was something else that you said that triggered me. There's something in a very positive way. That was it. So my wife and I were discussing this the other day. You see, if you do what you're meant to be doing, one of the clues is that when you're doing something you're meant to be doing, again, like relating back to talents and temperament, you tend to be good at it. And funnily enough, the second characteristic is it tends to be something that people actually appreciate. So if you do what you're meant to be doing, there's actually more likelihood that you'll get that appreciation, but it will be a side effect. It's not something that you're desperately needy to receive, you know? One thing I'm often telling young people who I mentor is it's important to build our sense of self-worth, you know? Because when you do that, what happens is it gives you a certain level of detachment, a certain level of integrity, a certain level of psychological space. So then you're no longer needing the validation of others, because when there's healthy self-esteem, it's actually what happens is your thought pattern is such that you're starting to validate yourself. Healthy self-esteem, and we'll do a whole thing on this in the future. What happens in a person with healthy self-esteem, at a very deep level of consciousness, their thought pattern is, I am valuable and everyone else is valuable. So what that does is it sets a psychological benchmark. You're doing what you're doing, I'm doing what I'm doing, we're both valuable. I'm not valuable because of what I'm doing, I'm valuable, full stop. You're not valuable because of what you're doing, you're valuable, full stop. And if you build from that platform, then it's easy to make a contribution. All of you have seen, all of us know some parents who try and force their kids to do what the parents wanted to do in their own childhood, right? So the parent with the unfulfilled desires, you know, I want my daughter to be a film star. It's like, well, really? Like, well, if she doesn't want to be a film star. And then that daughter grows up resenting her mum because she feels that she was forced to do that even though she didn't want to do it. And then the mum can't figure out why the daughter doesn't want to spend time with her. It's because the mum didn't work on herself. I sent a message to a friend of mine today, and I said to her, if you don't work on yourself, the weaknesses that you haven't figured out, even if you don't mean to, you'll put that on your children. Because they'll pick it up just by the association. So the best thing we can do is make that journey, and especially that spiritual development, which also helps to enhance all these other levels. Does that answer your question, Isabel?
Yeah, I hope this is, yeah. I don't know if you have time for me to ask this, but you say,
and I'll take it according to them, because I'm your servant.
You say that like we're all valuable, full stop, and I agree 100%. I'm not saying that's wrong. And there are so many different traditions for why. In terms of like the Bhakti tradition,
Yes.
Why is it that all people, regardless of what they do, are valuable?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So in the Bhakti tradition, and this is one of the first points which are brought out in the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhakti tradition begins the journey by saying you're not the body, right? We have a body. We have a male body, some of us have a female body, some of us have a European body, some of us have a Chinese body, some of us have an Indian body, some have an African body. The first lesson in spiritual life is that you are not this body. And to the extent that we recognize and embrace that, to that extent, you don't suffer the same way that most people do. See, what people often try to do, and again, we're talking as friends. It's not well known, but to the extent that I embrace my bodily identity, to that extent, I become more severe and intense in my suffering as I grow old. And I experience a more intense suffering every time I have a disease, right? So think about what's happened now, COVID, right? Mm-hmm. If someone identifies with their body, any experience related to the body is experienced as more of an intense suffering. Mm-hmm. I know you've seen this, right? So I'm going to just give an example. I was coming back from America. I was coming back from Florida. I was in the airport and I saw on the screen, it was an interview of two people who had had plastic surgery. And what happened, you should have seen the degree of plastic surgery they had, it was intense. They actually looked like they were made of plastic. It was like literally like big bottles, like, you know, like injections in the face, like big like lips. It was just, it looked really out of whack. And I felt for them because what I knew was behind all this, the extensive degree to which they're trying to fight back old age and wrinkles and all that kind of stuff is to the degree to which they identified with their body. Mm. So when the Bhagavad Gita says that, it has real psychological ramifications. If we recognize that I'm not the body, then funnily enough, what happens is just the same thing that happens when you're with your friends. When your friend has an issue with her relationship and she comes to you for advice, you can give better advice than she can. Why? Because you're not directly emotionally involved. It gives you a bit of psychological distance. So you can kind of look at it from a distance. Yeah, just do, yeah, if he's not treating you right, just say this, do this, say that, and you'll be fine. Mm. Because she's emotionally involved, it's harder. Now, the same thing happens with the body. If there's psychological distance, yeah, I'll do my yoga, I'll look after it. But yeah, it's growing old, I grow old gracefully. But if I'm not psychologically distanced, oh my God, I'm growing old. Oh, I've got wrinkles. And it causes more anxiety and more unhappiness. And you can never get enough money to fix every single thing. It doesn't, the body doesn't work like that. You know, you can't keep paying for, you know, different things. In fact, you'll see there's studies when people, it's actually very dangerous when people do a lot of plastic surgery, because the previous plastic surgery can then react to what you're doing now, and then that can cause other complications. And I'm sure many of you know about this. There have been people who've had plastic surgery on their breast, for example, and the silicone bursts and they can get cancer, all these things. And I'm thinking, wow, all the money you spend on plastic surgery, if you'd spent a fraction of that time developing a deep sense of self-esteem and a deep spirituality, you wouldn't mind what's happening to your body. But what's even more crazy than that is your consciousness also affects your body. People who have a more spiritual consciousness, they don't age in the same way, right? There's a whole study on this. There's a field called psychoneuroimmunology, right? If people have the right kind of consciousness, it actually has an effect upon their physical body. So if you have the right consciousness, you don't get stressed in the same way because you see things in a bit of a distance. You understand a higher picture. Stress has a lot to do with our expectations, which we mentioned earlier. And stress has a lot to do with us having expectations which are out of sync with reality. And stress has a lot to do with people feeling unhappy internally. Therefore, they're desperately attached to things going their way externally in order to experience some pleasure. So yeah, so just some thoughts on that.
That's really helpful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to stop talking now because I asked way too many questions, but thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that was amazing, actually. The question and answer back and forth was so nice to hear. I think one big thing I was gathering from all of that is this idea and concept of detachment and how it can completely shift our mindset when we just detach from this body and therefore ultimately detach from everything else that goes on externally and then try to start seeking happiness from within. So thank you so much for that.
I'm going to add to that point about detachment. See, there's another way of giving a terminology. It's more around integrity. You're going to be on the planet for some time. You need to like yourself. You understand? You can't be that person who's bitter, angry, resentful because you just went along with the crowd. Being young gives you, and I say this from my own experience when I was your age at university, it gives you a great facility to ask some of these deeper questions and to align yourself with these deeper questions before you got kids, before you've got the job just taking all of your time and energy, because before you've got all these other considerations. It gives you that space to kind of figure out some key things and to set your foundations in life. If you set good foundations, you're immediately in the top 0.001% of society, full stop, straight up. So it's more about integrity and detachment. It gives you a certain integrity because now you can look at things and honestly try to understand the truth rather than just being swayed by things. There's nothing wrong with being swayed by people who are wiser than you and who have your best interests at heart. But just being swayed by people who are less insightful or who have bad motive, that's where life's going to take you in a bad direction. So yeah, we want to be influenced, but we want to be influenced by the right people who have more insight than we do and who also have our best interests at heart, because we don't know everything. But that's what I mean by good association. They have more wisdom. Okay, so they can help me to understand things that I may not understand it myself. And they're on my side. So again, the DES, people who want to develop you, people, that means your consciousness, people who want to encourage you, that means your emotional well-being, and people who are spiritual, that means that there's a deeper understanding about consciousness and the meaning of life.
Wow. Yeah. That's amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah. Wow. So the next question is from Cleo. So if we can unmute Cleo. We're just trying to get through as many questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your talk. A long time ago, because I asked this question a long time ago, you mentioned that when a father, for example, when he was young, he used to mistreat, so to say, a lot of women because he slept around with them and he hurt them in a way, this will be compensated to his daughter. And I was just wondering.
No. It's not compensated necessarily. It's that he has to learn a lesson. He has to understand that the way you treat these people, it causes them a lot of suffering. And he has to really understand that that's not how you should respect women or even men, actually, meaning that we shouldn't treat anyone badly. So karma is an exercise in empathy. It's what's the best way for this person to really deeply understand how we should be and how we should not be.
Yes, thank you very much. No, I was wondering, sorry, maybe I didn't phrase it correctly. So why would an independent human being have to suffer in case the daughter for the father to understand a certain message?
Thank you, Claire. It's a brilliant question. So it wouldn't be that it's independent. So let's explain how karma works. So when there's karma that we have to experience, everything is coordinated for that experience. So for example, the father of that daughter, there's a distinct reason why his daughter's going through that experience and he's exposed to it. That's one thing. The other thing is that girl who is the daughter, there's a reason why she is also having that experience. It's not that she's an innocent person and she's just a means by which he's meant to learn a lesson, but rather they're all learning different lessons at the same time simultaneously, okay? So she's learning something. See, this is a point, I didn't really get into this earlier, but it may be, and in our tradition, it says, and this is why it's so important to understand we're not the body. In one life, I may be in a male body, but in another lifetime, I could be in a female body. In one lifetime, I may be in an Indian body. In another lifetime, I could be in an African body or in a European body. So I'll be honest, when I see you guys, I'm not thinking, oh, I'm black, and I'm thinking, we're all family. The way and I really mean this, the way I deal with you, I'm gonna be treated that way at some point in the future. So it's not that these are my people and then you're not, you're someone else. No, we're all family, right? We're all family. My own mentor, he was African-American in terms of his body, but his whole thing is, someone is your brother or sister by consciousness. Do you understand? So even when I look at you, where are you from, Clea?
I'm from Albania, but I'm living in Cambridge at the moment, yes.
Fantastic. So the point is, we're still family. And it's not like, oh, well, you know, my group here, and then there's Clea. No, how I deal with you is exactly how I'm gonna be dealt with. So everyone has their lessons to learn, and we often learn certain lessons in a collective. So a group may have the same experience, and then there's always different lessons that different members of the group are picking up from that same experience. There's also collective karma as well, where certain groups collectively are going to learn certain things as well. But that's just to explain or answer your question. Does that make sense, first of all?
Yes, so if I can ask a follow-up question, sorry, it's all idea of the soul that moves from one body to the other, right? So because I study child abuse and neglect, I was wondering, what about infants that are abused and neglected? They didn't necessarily do anything to deserve that, so to say. Would you argue that it's the soul that in a previous life did something wrong and it's now kind of suffering the consequences of that?
That's a very, very good question. See, there's two things. So I asked the guru about this many years ago because I had a similar kind of thing, and actually I posited an answer which was confirmed for me. So in the Bhagavad Gita, so let's give two principles. One is a principle which I mentioned, right? So someone is going through a certain experience based upon their previous behaviors. That's one way of looking at it. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna also says something very interesting. And he makes the point that whatever state of being one has at the end of their life, that has an impact upon the next life, okay? And an example that's given in the Vedas is there's a personality called Bharat Maharaj. And what happened towards the end of his life is, and he was a very great spiritual person. Towards the end of his life, he became attached to a deer, right? The animal, right? And because that was his meditation, at the time of death, in his next life, he was born into a deer's body. So it wasn't exactly that he was in an animalistic behavior, but it was a meditation that he had at the time of death, which also brought him into a certain experience in the next life. So to your point, there can be, let's say, two things. There's two factors you can consider. You can consider the situation based upon our previous actions ourselves, but there can also be a situation based upon the meditation that we've had and the attachments that we had towards the end of a particular lifetime as well. And these can both have impact in terms of drawing us into a future experience. Yeah, but one other thing I want to say, and I think this is very important. Whatever someone experiences in their life, and I assert this from the bottom of my heart, whatever someone experiences in their life, the reasons are secondary, compassion is primary. Okay? Because we've all made mistakes in our previous and present lives. What we've done is secondary. I only stress that because it can be easily misunderstood that, oh, well, that's your, you're going through something bad, well, that's your fault, therefore. No. The primary thing is even the fact that we're in this world, growing old and dying, everyone dies. My grandmother passed away recently.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. I mean, these things happen. She was 103 years old. She passed away in her sleep. They came to get her in the morning. They found her just in her bed and all that kind of stuff. The death rate on planet Earth is 100%. You get the point, right? So compassion is primary. We all go through things. And to be honest with you, we've all gone through lots of good and bad things, even in previous lives that we can't remember. The most important thing to do when we're dealing with people is to be compassionate. Not even just when they're going through bad situations. We should be loving even when people when we're dealing with people in their day-to-day lives. Because when you love people and you care for them and you help them to grow, then if they go through a challenge later on, they meet that challenge from a position of strength rather than meeting the challenge from a position of weakness. We're all going to go through things. I know many people in this pandemic period who got coronavirus. I know some people, and I even know people who passed away. One person, I met him, we were at a memorial in a place called the Manor. Maybe some of you have been there. And we were in a memorial for a mutual friend, and he saw me, his name was Rameshwara, and he gave me a hug. Like, we embraced at that memorial. I've known him for many years. He was just I really had a lot of, I just thought he's just so kind and affectionate, right? Like an older brother. He passed away from coronavirus, right? So he's got friends and family, and I saw him literally weeks before he passed away. So I really want us to make sure that everything is in proper context. We all go through good and bad experiences. Some you can see, some that you can't. And there's one other secret there, because we go through good and bad experiences also according to consciousness. Some people in the world have been through really externally bad experiences, but it didn't affect them as much because they had a higher consciousness. Other people, they went through less, but because their consciousness was lower, the suffering from that lesser experience was more intense. So I'm just making this as a general rule. Don't think that, oh, you're dealing with this, you're bad, you were bad before, you're going through this, you were good. It's not quite that simple. There's an internal element to this, right? You sometimes hear about people who grew up in a bad situation, and actually, to be honest with you, they didn't say it, but they weren't affected so much by that bad situation. You got some other person, they grew up in a billionaire family, they've got all kinds of anxieties, they feel insecure. It's like, but I don't get it. You grew up in a millionaire family. Whatever you wanted, mum and dad just gave it to you. But they're insecure, they're depressed. You know this is true. You hear about Hollywood stars who've got depression, right? Who are addicted to drugs and alcohol, but it's like, how? Like, you don't need anything materially. It's not that, it's not external, it's not the ultimate thing externally, it's the consciousness. And therefore, if we act in the proper way in this lifetime and develop higher consciousness, then it doesn't actually, in one sense, matter what you go through. You'll still be the happiest person on the planet. Does that make some sense and give you some answers?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you so much for your question, Clea.
Thank you for your answers.
I'm just loving all these answers. They're helping me so much. So the last question unfortunately, it's going to be the last question, and we only have 5 minutes to answer this question because we're stuck for time. Is you spoke about meditation. So what type of meditation do you do, and would you recommend it to all of us?
Okay, well, let's answer the second question first. The meditation I do, I would recommend it to all of you. That's the first thing. How many of you have been to the manor? Maybe raise, show the hand sign. Just want to get a sense of, okay, only a couple. Okay, no worries. So we have a wonderful center called Bhaktivedanta Manor. And for many years, like decades, we've been holding retreats there, and different groups of students will come and they get introduced to different types of meditation. Now, I've tried many different types of meditation. Like I said, I started meditating when I was 13 years old, and some really interesting realizations. The meditation that I do, which I encourage you to definitely explore, is what we call mantra meditation. Mantra meditation is particularly powerful for a number of reasons. And that is that mantra, it actually aligns with the sense of hearing, okay? So there are some meditations which are more active than others. With mantra meditation, you're not just trying to blank your mind, but you're rather bringing your mind into contact with a particular sound vibration. There's experiments which have been done, and you can look this up as well. They did an experiment where they had some water, and they would speak, like, let's say, loving words, and they would freeze the water while they were speaking loving words. And you'll see that the water would freeze and it would tessellate. The patterns in the ice would be very harmonious. They did the same thing, but in the second example, with another group of water, they would say negative words and speak harshly. And you see that when the water freezes, it was a more erratic pattern. A friend of mine, he did a similar experiment, and it's a brilliant experiment. And his project is called the Atma Paradigm, okay? And what he did, and you can try this experiment. This is just to show you just how real, how tangible, and how powerful these things are. This is not a belief, it's not dogma, it's not someone's idea. So in the experiment that he did, he cooked some rice, okay? So just one pot of rice, just a little bit of rice, and he divided it into, I think, 2 or 3 portions. So one portion of rice every day, and I know it sounds a bit weird, but let's bear with me. Every day he would say loving words to the rice. Oh, I love you. Oh, you're so beautiful. Oh, you're so tasty. You're so delicious. Like that. Speak loving words to the rice. That was one pot. The second pot, every day he would speak negatively to the rice, right? And bear in mind, he would speak to the different pots of rice for the same period. Let's say it's a minute. So the second pot, I hate you, you're disgusting, you're negative, all that negatively, right? For the same amount of time. And I think the third pot of rice was just like a control. So he wouldn't say anything to that pot of rice. He took pictures of the rice at set periods, like, after one day, after a week, after whatever period, right? So regular periods. And you could see the pictures. I'm not sure if he's put his research online, but what he saw, and I saw the pictures. So I know this is actually what happens. The rice which was spoken to lovingly, it maintained its form, and it preserved its quality for a longer period of time. The rice which was spoken to negatively and harshly, it decayed faster than the rice which was spoken to positively. And that principle is a principle that's given in Bhakti Yoga. And that is that sound vibration has an effect. And this is what I was talking about before when I said the way you live, the way you think, also your consciousness has an effect upon the body. Consciousness actually has an effect on matter, right? And consciousness can be conveyed by sound. So the practice that I do is meditation, mantra meditation, and the mantras that I use in particular are mantras which are given in the Vedic literatures, in the Bhakti Yoga literatures, and those mantras are specific divine mantras, specific sounds, specific sacred names, which are actually consisting of names of the Supreme. And by doing them regularly, it actually elevates the consciousness. And to be honest with you, if you do it properly and you practice it, I mean, it can just give you everything. I mean, it's almost like it's almost like it's almost like a genie. It's almost like a wish. It's in some ways it's like a wish fulfilling mantra, but that's all. I'm not going to get into that. I'm not going to get into that side of things. But it's a mantra consisting of divine names. Okay, and if you practice that mantra on a regular basis, it's easier to do because you're just having to listen to the sound of the vibration of those mantras, you know, and that mantra has been given as a very powerful mantra, especially at this time, in order to elevate consciousness and to reawaken our natural state of bliss, happiness, fearlessness, wisdom, eternality. All of those different things can be reawakened in that particular state, you know. So that's the mantra that I use. Yeah, I guess maybe the thing to do, some of you may have heard this mantra in KC Soks, and it's used a lot in the kirtan space as well. So many famous people are into kirtan, which is where people come together with instruments and they sing and they dance along with these divine mantras. So I'll just explain the 3 different names of that mantra, and you can look into this. Maybe if people want to find out more, they can find out more through the KC Sok. The first name, which means all attractive, okay? So it actually, it brings a consciousness of appreciation for the all attractive. That first name has 2 syllables, Krishna, Krishna. Right, so that's one of the special names in this mantra. The second name is, well, actually the third, right, so Krishna is one name, not the first one, but one name. The second name refers to the energy of everything, right? All the energy in existence, in reality. And that's Hare, okay? Which refers to the energy of everything. That Hare also refers to the eternal female potency, right? The original feminine energy. And then the third name is Rama. Rama means literally the reservoir of all pleasure. So the mantra I chant is a 16-syllable mantra made up of these 3 names, you know, and I do that regularly. And by doing that, again, don't believe what I'm saying to you. It's something that you can practice for yourself. And if you do it, I've done it, it's magical. It's magical. So I pronounce it in the form of 16 syllables, and I'll just say it once because I know that they're recording this and the recordings will be available if people wish. So it's Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. And you can practice it as much as you want or as little as you want. You can practice it in your own time, wherever you are, in whichever way you want. But it's an extremely powerful mantra. I'll be honest with you. And again, when I studied philosophy and economics, we were taught to scrutinize, right? But what's interesting about modern philosophy is I call it conclusophobia. Conclusophobia means a fear of coming to any conclusions, right? So they like to just speculate, well, I think this, well, I think that, I think this, well, I think that. But my whole point is that when you have an experience, you don't need to argue about it anymore, right? When you're happy, people can tell you, I don't believe it, but it doesn't matter because you know it works because you've done it. But it's something for people, it actually requires people, to be honest, who are a bit mature. A mature person is looking to actually understand the truth. An immature person is looking to just refute something because they're uncomfortable with having to change or adjust to a deeper understanding about life. So it's really about you. But anyone who does it sincerely on a regular basis, it works. That's what I do, just to answer that question.